I'm Madison, 28 years old, and I'm sitting in my tiny studio apartment wondering how I became the invisible daughter in my own family. Growing up, no matter what I accomplished or how hard I tried, my younger sister Sienna was always the golden child who could do no wrong. For 3 years, I secretly sent $5,000 every month to help my struggling parents, sacrificing my own comfort and dreams. But when my father publicly humiliated me at a family gathering, crediting Sienna for my generosity, I made a decision that changed everything. Before I tell you how I finally stood up for myself, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family drama that might surprise you. The pattern started early in our childhood home in Columbus, Ohio. My father, Robert, worked long hours in construction, coming home exhausted with calloused hands and a sore back. My mother, Linda, taught part-time at the local elementary school, always worrying about making ends meet. Despite their struggles, they somehow found endless patience and resources for my sister Sienna, who was 3 years younger than me. Sienna was everything I wasn't. She had naturally blonde hair that caught the sunlight perfectly, bright blue eyes that sparkled when she laughed, and a personality that drew people in like a magnet. Teachers loved her, neighbors adored her, and our parents treated her like precious china that needed constant protection and admiration. I, on the other hand, was the practical one. While Sienna played with dolls and dreamed of becoming a famous artist, I helped Mom with laundry, made sure the dishwasher was loaded correctly, and kept track of everyone's schedules. When Sienna forgot her homework, I reminded her. When she couldn't find her favorite dress, I helped her look. I became the responsible older sister who took care of everything behind the scenes. The differences in how we were treated became impossible to ignore as we got older. Every August, Mom would take us school shopping. Sienna would get 3 new outfits, new shoes, a fresh backpack, and all the supplies her artistic heart desired. I would get 1 new shirt, and was expected to make do with Sienna's outgrown clothes from the previous year, even though they were often too small or completely different from my style. When Sienna decided she wanted to take dance classes, our parents immediately enrolled her in the most expensive studio in town. They bought her multiple leotards, tights, ballet shoes, and jazz shoes. They attended every single recital, taking dozens of photos and bragging to relatives about her natural grace and talent. When I expressed interest in joining the academic decathlon team, which only required a $25 registration fee, I was told we couldn't afford extra activities right now. The piano incident was perhaps the most telling example of how differently we were treated. Both Sienna and I begged our parents for piano lessons during the same week. We had saved up our allowance money and presented our cases passionately. Mom and Dad sat us down for what I thought would be a fair discussion about taking turns or finding a way for both of us to learn. Instead, they explained that piano lessons were expensive and they could only afford to send one of us. Then Dad looked directly at Sienna and said, "Sweetheart, you have such natural musical talent. We can hear it when you sing in the shower. Madison is more practical-minded, so this would be better suited for Sienna." I felt my heart sink, but I forced myself to smile and congratulate my sister. This became my pattern throughout childhood: swallow the disappointment, be the bigger person, and hope that someday my sacrifices would be noticed and appreciated. During high school, the favoritism became even more pronounced. Sienna was the star of the drama club, homecoming princess, and social butterfly who never met a person she couldn't charm. Our parents attended every play she was in, sometimes driving 2 hours to see her perform in competitions. Meanwhile, I was quietly excelling academically, earning a 4.2 grade point average, and working part-time at a local grocery store to save money for college. When I was inducted into the National Honor Society, our parents missed the ceremony because it conflicted with one of Sienna's dress rehearsals. When I won a $500 scholarship for academic excellence, the celebration dinner was postponed because Sienna had a date that night and wanted to use the car. I told myself that this treatment was just because Sienna needed more attention and guidance. I convinced myself that my independence was actually a gift because it was making me stronger and more self-reliant. Deep down, though, I carried a constant ache of wondering what I needed to do to earn the same level of love and pride that seemed to flow so naturally toward my sister. College applications revealed the true extent of the disparity. I applied to state universities, researched scholarship opportunities extensively, and prepared to take on student loans to make my education possible. I spent countless hours writing essays, studying for standardized tests, and working extra shifts to save money. Sienna, meanwhile, had her heart set on a prestigious private art college that cost nearly $50,000 per year. When she was accepted, our parents were overjoyed and immediately began making arrangements to cover her full tuition, room, and board. There was no discussion about loans or financial responsibility. It was simply understood that Sienna's dreams were worth any sacrifice. When I brought up my own college plans, I was told that they were proud of my independence and knew I would figure it out. The message was clear. Sienna's education was an investment the family would make together, while mine was my own responsibility to manage. Despite the hurt I felt, I remained hopeful that things would change as we became adults. I believed that my hard work and dedication would eventually be recognized. I thought that once I proved myself in the real world, my parents would see my value and treat me with the same respect and admiration they showered on Sienna. This hope kept me going through years of feeling like a supporting character in my own family story. After graduating with a degree in marketing and a mountain of student loan debt, I threw myself into building a career with the same determination I had applied to everything else in my life. I landed an entry-level position at a mid-sized marketing firm in downtown Columbus and quickly gained a reputation for being reliable, creative, and willing to work longer hours than anyone else. My first apartment was a tiny studio on the east side of town, barely 400 square feet with a Murphy bed that folded down from the wall and a kitchenette so small that I could touch both walls while standing in the middle. The rent was $650 a month, which was exactly what I could afford after making my student loan payments, buying groceries, and covering basic utilities. I furnished the space with items from thrift stores and garage sales, slowly collecting mismatched plates, a second-hand couch with a small tear in the cushion, and a coffee table I assembled myself from a kit. Every purchase was carefully considered and budgeted for weeks in advance. I learned to cook simple meals, clip coupons, and find free entertainment around the city. Meanwhile, Sienna graduated from her expensive art college with a degree in fine arts and immediately moved back into our childhood bedroom. She talked about pursuing her passion for painting and sculpture while she figured out her next steps. Our parents were completely supportive of this plan, encouraging her to take the time she needed to find herself artistically. Our monthly family dinners became a showcase for Sienna's creative journey. She would bring her latest paintings to show off, and Mom and Dad would spend the entire evening discussing color theory, artistic inspiration, and the challenges of being a sensitive artist in a harsh commercial world. They hung her artwork throughout the house, proudly showing it off to visitors and talking about her natural talent. When conversation occasionally turned to my work, the topic rarely lasted more than a few minutes. Marketing was seen as practical but not particularly interesting or impressive. My promotions and achievements were acknowledged with brief congratulations before the focus inevitably shifted back to Sienna's artistic endeavors. During my second year at the firm, I was promoted to senior analyst with a significant salary increase. I was excited to share the news at our next family dinner, hoping it would finally earn me some of the recognition I had always craved. I had prepared stories about the successful campaigns I had contributed to and the positive feedback I had received from clients. When I announced my promotion, Mom smiled and said, "That's wonderful, honey. You've always been so good with practical things." Then she immediately turned to Sienna and asked about her latest art project, and the conversation moved on without any further discussion of my achievement. That night, as I drove home to my small apartment, I felt a familiar mixture of disappointment and resignation. I had learned not to expect too much celebration of my successes, but it still stung every time my accomplishments were treated as routine while Sienna's were treated as extraordinary. It was around this time that I started noticing signs of financial stress in my parents' household. Dad's construction work was becoming more sporadic as he got older and his back problems worsened. Mom's part-time teaching salary wasn't enough to cover their mortgage, utilities, and daily expenses, especially with Sienna living at home without contributing financially. During one particularly difficult month, I overheard Dad on the phone with the electric company asking for an extension on their payment. Mom was clipping more coupons than usual and had started buying generic brands for everything. I could see the worry lines deepening around their eyes, though they tried to hide their stress from both Sienna and me. Without telling anyone, I started sending $200 a month to help with their expenses. I set up an automatic transfer from my checking account to theirs, timing it to arrive around the 15th of each month when I knew bills were typically due. I told myself it was just temporary assistance until Dad's work picked up again. The first few months, my parents called to thank me for the money, though they seemed confused about where it was coming from. I had deliberately made the transfers appear anonymous, not wanting to make a big deal about helping out. When they asked if I knew anything about the mysterious deposits, I suggested maybe Sienna had set something up as a surprise. To my amazement, they immediately accepted this explanation and began praising Sienna for her thoughtfulness and generosity. They talked about how mature and caring she was becoming, how proud they were that she was thinking of their needs even while pursuing her artistic dreams. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness listening to them credit Sienna for my secret assistance. Part of me was happy that they were receiving help and feeling supported by what they thought was their younger daughter's love. Another part of me felt invisible once again, contributing significantly to their well-being while remaining completely unrecognized. Around this time, I started dating James, a software engineer I met at a coffee shop near my office. He was kind, intelligent, and genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions. For the first time in my life, I felt like someone truly valued what I had to say and appreciated my perspectives. James quickly noticed the dynamics in my family relationships. After attending a few family dinners, he pulled me aside and asked why my parents seemed so much more engaged with Sienna than with me. He had observed how conversation flowed naturally when she spoke but seemed to stall when I tried to contribute. I found myself making excuses for their behavior, explaining that Sienna was just more outgoing and entertaining, that my parents were proud of me in their own way. James listened carefully, but I could see the concern in his eyes. He began pointing out moments when my contributions were overlooked or dismissed, helping me recognize patterns I had trained myself to ignore. The breaking point of this period came during my 25th birthday. I had mentioned the date several times leading up to it, hoping maybe this year would be different. I had even taken the day off work, thinking perhaps my family might want to celebrate together. The morning came and went without any calls or messages. By afternoon, I was trying not to feel hurt, telling myself that everyone was just busy. Then, around 4 o'clock, Sienna called excitedly to tell me about the surprise party our parents were throwing for her upcoming 22nd birthday. She spent 20 minutes describing the decorations they were planning, the cake they had ordered, and the guest list they had compiled. She was so excited that she didn't even realize she was calling me on my actual birthday to talk about her upcoming celebration. When I gently mentioned that it was my birthday today, there was a brief pause before she said, "Oh wow, I totally forgot. Happy birthday." This party planning has had my brain all scattered. She didn't offer to include me in her celebration or suggest that our parents might want to acknowledge my birthday. The oversight felt complete and devastating. That evening, James took me out for a quiet dinner and listened as I finally admitted how invisible I felt in my own family. Despite all of this pain, I continued sending money to my parents, gradually increasing the amount as my salary grew and their needs seemed to expand. I had convinced myself that my financial contributions were more valuable than recognition, that helping them practically was more important than receiving emotional validation. The turning point came during the winter of my 26th year when Dad suffered a serious injury on a construction site. He was carrying heavy materials up a ladder when his foot slipped, causing him to fall and land hard on his back. The injury required surgery, months of physical therapy, and extended time off work that workers' compensation only partially covered. The medical bills started arriving immediately, and I could see the panic in my parents' faces during our family dinners. They tried to hide their financial stress, but the signs were everywhere. Mom started taking on additional tutoring students, working evenings and weekends to bring in extra income. Dad grew increasingly frustrated with his physical limitations and worried constantly about their mounting debt. Sienna, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware of the severity of their situation. She continued living at home without paying rent, buying art supplies with money she borrowed from Mom, and talking about her creative projects as if financial concerns didn't exist. When Dad winced in pain getting up from his chair, she would give him a quick hug and return to discussing her latest painting. Without hesitation, I increased my monthly contributions to $1,000. This meant making significant sacrifices in my own life, but seeing my parents struggle was more painful than any personal discomfort I might experience. I started buying generic groceries exclusively, canceled my gym membership, and stopped going out with friends to save money. The response to this increased support was immediate and heartwarming. My parents' stress levels visibly decreased, and they began talking about Sienna's incredible generosity and maturity. They bragged to relatives about how their artistic daughter was somehow managing to help support the family while pursuing her dreams. "We always knew Sienna had a good heart," Mom would say to anyone who would listen. "But seeing her sacrifice her own comfort to help us through this difficult time just shows what an amazing young woman she's become." Dad would nod proudly and add, "She never makes us feel bad about accepting her help. She just quietly takes care of everything and expects nothing in return." We raised her right. Listening to these conversations filled me with a complex mixture of emotions. I was genuinely happy that my parents felt supported and loved during their crisis. I was proud that I could provide meaningful assistance during their time of need. But I was also increasingly frustrated that my actual sacrifices were being attributed to someone else entirely. As Dad's recovery progressed slowly, their expenses continued to mount. Physical therapy sessions, prescription medications, and ongoing medical appointments created an endless stream of bills. Mom's tutoring income helped, but it wasn't enough to cover both their regular expenses and the additional medical costs. Once again, I stepped up my contributions, this time to $3,000 per month. This decision required even more dramatic lifestyle changes. I moved to an even smaller apartment in a less desirable neighborhood, reducing my rent by $200 monthly. I sold my car and started using public transportation exclusively, saving on insurance, gas, and parking fees. My social life became practically non-existent as I eliminated all discretionary spending. I stopped buying coffee on my way to work, brought lunch from home every day, and found free activities for entertainment. I shopped exclusively at discount stores and bought clothing only when absolutely necessary. The physical and emotional toll of maintaining this level of financial support while living so minimally began to show. I was tired constantly from long work hours and weekend side jobs I had taken on to increase my income. I was losing weight because I was eating less expensive food in smaller quantities. James noticed the changes and expressed increasing concern about my well-being. "Madison, you're working yourself to death," he said one evening as I fell asleep on his couch while we were watching a movie. You're exhausted all the time, you never want to go anywhere that costs money, and you look like you haven't had a decent meal in weeks. I tried to explain that I was just going through a tight financial period and things would improve soon. I couldn't bring myself to tell him about the money I was sending to my family, partly because I was embarrassed about the family dynamics and partly because I was afraid he would try to talk me out of helping them. Meanwhile, Sienna's lifestyle showed no signs of the financial constraints that were dominating my existence. She got weekly manicures, bought expensive organic groceries, and frequently went out to dinner with friends. She had started dating someone new and was always dressed in stylish outfits that must have cost more than my monthly grocery budget. During family dinners, conversations continued to revolve around Sienna's artistic growth and her generous support of the family. My parents would talk about how blessed they felt to have such a caring daughter who understood their needs without being asked. They praised her emotional intelligence and her ability to balance her own dreams with family responsibility. "Sienna just has this intuitive understanding of what we need," Mom would say. "She never makes us ask for help. She just quietly takes care of everything." Dad would smile and pat Sienna's hand. "We don't know how we got so lucky to have a daughter who cares this much about family." These conversations were becoming increasingly difficult for me to endure. I would sit at the table, eating the meal that my money had probably helped purchase, listening to my parents praise my sister for my sacrifices. Sienna would smile modestly and change the subject, never correcting their assumptions, but never acknowledging the truth either. As my contributions increased to $5,000 per month, I reached a breaking point in terms of personal sustainability. I was working 60-hour weeks at my regular job plus freelancing on weekends. I had moved to a studio apartment that was even smaller than my first place, with a shared bathroom down the hall and no air conditioning. I was eating mostly rice, beans, and whatever vegetables were on sale that week. I hadn't bought new clothes in over a year and was wearing shoes with holes in the soles because I couldn't afford to replace them. My social isolation was complete because I couldn't afford to participate in any activities that cost money. James was becoming increasingly worried about my health and well-being. He offered to help me financially, but I was too proud to accept assistance while I was secretly supporting my family to such an extreme degree. Our relationship was suffering because I was always tired, stressed, and unable to enjoy normal couple activities that required spending money. The irony of the situation was not lost on me. I was sacrificing my own health, happiness, and relationship to provide my family with financial stability, while my sister received all the credit and gratitude for my efforts. I was becoming invisible in my own life, existing solely to support others while my own needs and dreams were completely ignored. Yet despite the growing resentment and exhaustion, I continued the payments month after month. I had convinced myself that this sacrifice was temporary, that eventually Dad would recover fully and return to work, and that my parents would somehow discover the truth about who had been helping them. I held on to the hope that my hidden generosity would eventually be revealed and appreciated, making all the suffering worthwhile. The moment that changed everything happened on a warm Saturday afternoon in June during Sienna's 25th birthday celebration. My parents had decided to throw her a large backyard barbecue, inviting extended family members I rarely saw except for major holidays. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends filled our childhood backyard, all gathered to celebrate the golden child's quarter-century milestone. I had been dreading this party for weeks, knowing that my financial situation would make it difficult to give an impressive gift. After paying my monthly rent, utilities, and sending the usual $5,000 to my parents, I had exactly $60 left in my checking account until my next paycheck. I considered skipping the party entirely, but I knew that would create even more family drama and disappointment. After much deliberation, I decided to give Sienna a simple picture frame I found at a discount store for $12, along with the remaining $48 in cash. I wrote a heartfelt note explaining that I wanted her to have something to display her artwork and a little money to spend on art supplies. It wasn't much, but it was literally everything I could afford. The party was in full swing when I arrived, with cousins playing volleyball, aunts gossiping around the picnic table, and the smell of Dad's famous barbecue ribs filling the air. Sienna looked beautiful in a new sundress, her hair perfectly styled, surrounded by admirers complimenting her latest paintings that were displayed around the patio. As usual, I felt like an outsider at my own family gathering. Conversations seemed to flow around me rather than including me. When relatives asked about my life, their attention would drift away before I finished answering. I found myself helping Mom in the kitchen, setting up food stations, and cleaning up messes while everyone else enjoyed the celebration. The gift opening ceremony was scheduled for late afternoon when all the guests could gather around. Mom had set up a special table decorated with art-themed wrapping paper and paintbrush ribbons. Sienna's pile of presents was impressive, with large boxes and elegant gift bags suggesting expensive contents. Dad announced that it was time for the birthday girl to open her gifts, and everyone formed a circle around the decorated table. Sienna began opening presents to enthusiastic reactions from the crowd. She received professional art supplies, expensive jewelry, gift certificates to high-end stores, and various luxury items that reflected her status as the family favorite. My modest gift was near the bottom of the pile, wrapped in simple paper I had saved from Christmas. When Sienna picked it up, I felt my cheeks burning with embarrassment at how small and cheap it looked compared to everything else. She opened it gracefully, smiled, and thanked me genuinely for the thoughtful frame and the cash inside. But then Dad picked up the card and read the amount of money I had given. His face immediately changed from pleasant to disappointed, and his voice carried across the entire backyard as he exclaimed, "You only sent 60 cents?" The way he said it made it sound like I had given her loose change found between couch cushions. The entire party fell silent. 30 pairs of eyes turned to look at me with expressions ranging from embarrassment to pity. I felt my face burning with shame as Dad continued his commentary, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Sienna sends $5,000 a month," he declared, as if my modest gift was a personal insult to the family. "Your sister has been supporting this whole family while you can't even manage a decent birthday present." The humiliation was complete and devastating. I could see relatives exchanging glances, some looking sympathetic, but others clearly judging me for what appeared to be selfishness and lack of family loyalty. Uncle Frank shook his head disapprovingly. Cousin Marie whispered something to her husband behind her hand. In that moment, standing in front of my entire extended family while being publicly shamed for my apparent lack of generosity, I reached my breaking point. 3 years of secret sacrifice, 3 years of living in poverty to support my family, 3 years of watching Sienna receive credit for my efforts, and this was how I was repaid. "That was me," I said quietly, my voice barely audible over the uncomfortable murmur of the crowd. "I've been sending the money." Dad looked confused and slightly annoyed that I was interrupting his praise of Sienna. "What are you talking about?" "The $5,000 every month," I repeated, my voice stronger now. "That was me sending it. I've been supporting the family for 3 years." The backyard fell completely silent except for the sound of someone's radio playing softly in the distance. Mom stepped forward with an expression of disbelief and anger that I had never seen before. "Stop stealing her credit," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Don't lie to make yourself look better. We know exactly where that money comes from, and it's not from you." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Not only were my parents refusing to believe the truth about my sacrifices, but they were accusing me of lying about it in front of our entire extended family. I could see relatives looking back and forth between my parents and me, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding before them. Sienna stood frozen next to her pile of gifts, saying nothing to defend me or correct the misunderstanding. She had known for months that she wasn't sending money to our parents, but she was allowing me to be humiliated rather than speaking up with the truth. "I can show you the bank records," I said desperately, pulling out my phone. I can prove it was me. We don't need to see fake bank records, Dad said dismissively. We know our daughters, and we know which one of you has been taking care of this family. The final blow came when I looked around the circle of relatives and saw their faces. Instead of support or understanding, I saw pity, embarrassment, and judgment. They believed my parents' version of events completely. In their eyes, I was the selfish daughter who was so jealous of her generous sister that I would lie about financial contributions in front of the whole family. Uncle Frank cleared his throat awkwardly and suggested that maybe we should get back to celebrating Sienna's birthday. And Carol started gathering empty plates with obvious discomfort. Cousins began finding excuses to check on their children or refill their drinks. The party atmosphere was completely destroyed, but the blame for that destruction was clearly being placed on me. I stood there for another moment, surrounded by family members who thought they knew me but had never really seen me at all. The weight of 3 years of sacrifice, invisibility, and misunderstanding crashed down on me all at once. I realized that no amount of financial support, no level of self-denial, no sacrifice I could make would ever earn me the recognition and respect that came so naturally to Sienna. Without saying another word, I walked to my car and drove away from the party. Behind me, I could hear Dad's voice resuming the celebration, probably making jokes about dramatic sisters and getting back to the important business of celebrating Sienna's special day. That night, sitting alone in my tiny apartment, eating a dinner of rice and canned vegetables, I made the decision that would change everything. I logged into my bank account and canceled the automatic transfer that had been sending $5,000 every month to my parents. If they truly believed that Sienna was their generous benefactor, they were about to discover exactly what losing that support would mean. For the first time in 3 years, I kept my entire paycheck for myself. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. I didn't have to calculate how much I could afford to spend on groceries. I didn't have to choose between paying my electric bill and sending money home. For the first time since Dad's injury, my own financial needs could come first. The decision felt both empowering and terrifying. I was finally standing up for myself and demanding recognition for my contributions, but I was also risking the complete destruction of my relationship with my family. As I fell asleep that night, I wondered if I had just made the biggest mistake of my life or finally taken the first step toward reclaiming my worth. The immediate aftermath of my decision was surprisingly peaceful. For the first 2 weeks, after canceling the payments, I heard nothing from my family. I assumed they were still angry about what they perceived as my attention-seeking behavior at Sienna's party and were giving me space to cool down. Meanwhile, I was experiencing a level of financial freedom I hadn't felt in 3 years. With an extra $5,000 in my checking account, I could afford to buy fresh vegetables instead of relying solely on rice and beans. I replaced my worn-out shoes and bought a few basic clothing items to replace garments that had become embarrassingly shabby. I even treated myself to dinner at a modest restaurant with James, who was thrilled to see me enjoying a normal meal again. The silence from my family ended abruptly on a Tuesday evening when my phone started ringing repeatedly. The first call came from Mom at 6:30, followed immediately by Dad, then Sienna, then Mom again. I let them all go to voicemail, not ready to engage in what I knew would be an emotional and potentially explosive conversation. When I finally listened to the messages, the panic in their voices was unmistakable. Mom's first message was brief and confused. "Madison, honey, call me back. We need to talk about something important." Dad's message was more direct. "Call your mother. Something's wrong with the bank account." By the time I reached Sienna's message, the situation had become clear. Her voice was shaking as she explained that Mom and Dad had called her frantically because their monthly financial assistance hadn't arrived. She had been forced to admit that she had never sent any money to them and had no idea where their support had been coming from. The next morning, Dad called me directly. His voice was a mixture of confusion, embarrassment, and growing realization as he asked the question I had been waiting 3 years to hear. "Madison, we need to talk." The bank says the monthly transfers to our account were coming from your account number. Sienna says she never sent us any money. Can you explain what's going on? For a moment, I considered making him work harder for the truth. After years of being dismissed and overlooked, part of me wanted him to beg for information. But I was too exhausted from carrying the secret to drag out the revelation any longer. I've been sending you $5,000 every month for 3 years, I said simply. Since right after Dad's accident. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for nearly a minute. When Dad finally spoke, his voice was small and uncertain in a way I had never heard before. But you never told us it was you. We thought, Sienna said. Sienna never said anything, I interrupted. You assumed it was her, and I let you believe it because I thought it would be a nice surprise eventually. I never imagined you would refuse to believe me when I finally told you the truth. The conversation that followed was painful and awkward. Dad tried to apologize for his reaction at the party, but he also seemed confused about why I had kept the payments secret for so long. He asked repeatedly why I hadn't just told them from the beginning, as if the years of favoritism toward Sienna hadn't made it clear that my contributions would be valued differently than hers. When I explained that I had stopped the payments because of how I was treated at the party, Dad's tone shifted from apologetic to defensive. He accused me of being manipulative and using money to control the family. He suggested that stopping the payments was an overreaction and that I was punishing them for a simple misunderstanding. We can't afford to lose that support right now, he said bluntly. Your mother had to pick up extra tutoring work, and I'm still not back to full-time construction. We need you to restart those payments immediately. The entitlement in his voice was breathtaking. Even after discovering that I had been secretly supporting them for 3 years while living in near poverty, his primary concern was ensuring that the money continued flowing. There was no acknowledgement of my sacrifice, no appreciation for what I had given up, no recognition of how wrong they had been about crediting Sienna. I'm not restarting the payments unless things change, I said firmly. I want public acknowledgement of what I've done, equal treatment going forward. And Sienna needs to start contributing to the household instead of living like a supported child. Dad's response was immediate and angry. You can't blackmail your family with money. If you really cared about us, you wouldn't use our financial struggles as leverage to get attention. The accusation stung, but it also clarified something important for me. My family saw my financial support as an obligation rather than a gift. They viewed my desire for recognition not as a reasonable request for acknowledgement, but as attention-seeking behavior that diminished the value of my contributions. Over the following weeks, the pressure campaign intensified. Mom called crying about how they were going to lose their house if I didn't resume the payments. Sienna sent long text messages talking about how families should support each other unconditionally without keeping score or demanding recognition. The most manipulative approach came from extended family members who had been at the birthday party. Apparently, my parents had reached out to them explaining the financial crisis and asking them to convince me to be more reasonable. I received calls from Aunt Carol, Uncle Frank, and even cousins I rarely spoke to, all delivering variations of the same message. Family comes first. Money shouldn't come between loved ones, and I was being selfish by withholding support. None of these family members seemed particularly interested in hearing my side of the story. When I tried to explain the years of invisibility, sacrifice, and misattributed credit, they brushed off my concerns as minor complaints that paled in comparison to my parents' immediate financial needs. The most difficult call came from my grandmother, Mom's mother, who was 83 years old and had always been my favorite relative. She called crying, saying she was ashamed of how I was treating my parents and couldn't understand how I had become so heartless. Your parents raised you better than this, she said through tears. Family takes care of family, no matter what. How can you watch them struggle when you have the power to help? I tried to explain the situation to her, but she cut me off. I don't want to hear excuses. I want to see you acting like the good girl I raised you to be. That conversation broke something inside me. If even my beloved grandmother couldn't understand why I needed recognition and respect, maybe I was asking for too much. Maybe I was being selfish and petty. Maybe family loyalty really did mean giving without expecting anything in return. But then I remembered the humiliation I felt at Sienna's party, standing in front of 30 relatives while being accused of selfishness and jealousy. I remembered 3 years of eating rice and beans so my family could maintain their lifestyle. I remembered watching Sienna receive praise for my sacrifices while I remained invisible and unappreciated. James was my anchor during this period, reminding me that my requests were reasonable and my boundaries were healthy. He pointed out that I wasn't asking for money or gifts in return for my support. I was simply asking to be seen, acknowledged, and treated with basic respect. "You're not withholding money to be cruel," he reminded me during one of my moments of doubt. "You're asking for the bare minimum of recognition for 3 years of incredible sacrifice. If they can't give you that, then they don't deserve your continued support." As the weeks passed and my family's financial situation became more desperate, I held firm to my conditions. I watched from a distance as they scrambled to adjust their lifestyle, find additional income sources, and face the reality of living without the support they had taken for granted. It was painful to witness their struggles, but it was also necessary. For the first time in my adult life, I was prioritizing my own emotional needs over their comfort. I was demanding to be treated with the same respect they showed Sienna automatically. And despite the guilt, manipulation, and family pressure, I was not backing down. 3 months after I stopped the payments, my family's financial situation had become genuinely dire. Dad's partial return to construction work wasn't generating enough income to cover their basic expenses, let alone the lifestyle they had maintained with my secret support. Mom was tutoring every available hour, but still falling short of their monthly needs. The most significant change was in Sienna's circumstances. For the first time in her adult life, she was forced to confront financial reality. The art gallery job she had been considering but never seriously pursuing suddenly became a necessity. She applied for multiple positions and eventually landed a full-time role at a local graphic design firm, making $35,000 per year. Having to wake up early, dress professionally, and report to a supervisor was a shocking adjustment for someone who had spent 3 years living without responsibility or accountability. She complained constantly about the demands of working life, the creative constraints of commercial design, and the exhaustion of maintaining a regular schedule. However, the most eye-opening aspect of Sienna's new employment was the requirement that she contribute $800 per month to the household budget. For the first time, she understood the weight of supporting a family and the sacrifice required to maintain the comfortable lifestyle she had always taken for granted. During this period, my parents made several attempts to negotiate lesser terms for my return to financial support. Dad called to suggest that I could restart the payments without any public acknowledgement, arguing that the important thing was helping the family rather than getting credit. Mom proposed that I could send smaller amounts, maybe $2,000 per month, which would be easier to manage, but still significant. Each time, I calmly repeated my original conditions. Public acknowledgement of my 3 years of support, equal treatment and respect going forward, and Sienna's continued financial contribution to the household. I explained that these weren't punitive demands, but necessary changes to ensure healthy family dynamics. The breakthrough came during a particularly difficult week when Dad's back pain flared up and he missed several days of work. Without my financial cushion, the lost income created an immediate crisis. Their mortgage payment was due, utilities were being threatened with disconnection, and they had no savings to fall back on. That Wednesday evening, I received a call from Mom. Her voice was different than it had been during our previous conversations, less defensive and more genuinely remorseful. "Madison," she said quietly, "we need to talk." Really talk, not just argue about money or make demands. "Can you come over for dinner this Sunday?" Something in her tone told me this conversation would be different. I agreed to visit, but I made it clear that I wasn't changing my conditions regardless of how desperate their situation had become. Sunday dinner was awkward at first, with everyone being unusually polite and careful about their words. Sienna looked exhausted from her new work schedule, and I could see the stress lines around my parents' eyes more clearly than ever before. The house itself showed signs of financial strain, with small repairs being postponed and luxury items noticeably absent. After we finished eating, Dad cleared his throat and began the conversation I had been waiting 3 years to have. "Madison, we owe you an apology," he said, looking directly at me for the first time in months. "We were wrong about the money, wrong about how we treated you at Sienna's party, and wrong about how we've treated you for most of your life." Mom nodded and continued, "We've always been proud of you, but we took your strength and independence for granted. We assumed you didn't need as much attention or support as Sienna, but that wasn't fair. You deserved just as much recognition and celebration." The acknowledgement felt surreal after years of feeling invisible. I had imagined this moment countless times, but the reality was more emotional than I had expected. Part of me felt vindicated and relieved, while another part felt sad that it had taken such drastic action to reach this point. Sienna spoke next, and her words surprised me more than my parents' apology. "I knew the money wasn't coming from me," she admitted quietly. "I should have said something when Mom and Dad started crediting me for it, but I liked feeling important and appreciated. I was selfish and cowardly, and I'm sorry." This confession was perhaps the most meaningful part of the entire conversation. For years, I had wondered whether Sienna was actively participating in the deception or simply allowing it to continue through passive silence. Learning that she had known the truth all along was painful, but her honest admission was the first step toward rebuilding trust between us. Dad then addressed my specific conditions with a sincerity I had never heard from him before. "We accept all of your terms," he said. "We want to make this right, not just because we need the financial help, but because we love you and want you to feel valued in this family." The public acknowledgement came at the next family gathering, a 4th of July barbecue that was much smaller than Sienna's birthday party, but included the core group of relatives who had witnessed my humiliation. Dad stood up before dinner and addressed the group directly. "I need to make an announcement and an apology," he began. 3 months ago, I publicly embarrassed Madison by criticizing her birthday gift to Sienna. What I didn't know then was that Madison had been secretly supporting our family with $5,000 every month for 3 years. I was wrong to credit Sienna for Madison's generosity, and I was wrong to treat Madison with disrespect. The reactions from relatives were mixed. Some looked genuinely shocked and apologetic, while others seemed uncomfortable being forced to witness family drama again. But the important thing was that the truth had been spoken publicly, and my contributions had been officially acknowledged. More importantly, the change in day-to-day family dynamics was immediate and noticeable. My opinions were suddenly valued in family discussions. My achievements were celebrated with the same enthusiasm as Sienna's. When I mentioned getting a promotion at work, both parents asked detailed questions and expressed genuine pride in my success. Sienna's transformation was perhaps the most remarkable change of all. Working full-time had given her new perspective on financial responsibility and family sacrifice. She began treating me with a respect and appreciation that had never existed in our relationship before. "I had no idea how hard it was to support other people," she told me during a private conversation. "I never understood what you were giving up to help them. I'm sorry it took me so long to grow up." After 2 weeks of demonstrated change in their attitudes and treatment, I decided to resume financial support to the family. However, I restructured the arrangement to reflect my new understanding of healthy boundaries and sustainable generosity. Instead of the $5,000 per month that had required extreme personal sacrifice, I committed to sending $2,000 monthly. This amount still provided meaningful support for their household while allowing me to maintain a reasonable standard of living and save money for my own future. The difference in how this support was received was dramatic. Instead of being taken for granted or attributed to someone else, my contributions were acknowledged and appreciated. My parents called regularly to thank me and update me on how the money was being used. They included me in decisions about major purchases and asked for my input on financial planning. Most importantly, the support was clearly understood to be temporary assistance while they rebuilt their financial stability, not a permanent arrangement that would continue indefinitely. Sienna's employment and contribution to the household, combined with Dad's gradual return to full-time work, meant that my assistance was supplementing their efforts rather than replacing them. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like a valued and respected member of my family. The money I sent was appreciated rather than expected, my sacrifices were acknowledged rather than invisible, and my presence was welcomed rather than tolerated. The process of reaching this point had been painful and difficult, but it had ultimately created the healthy family dynamics I had always hoped for. By standing up for myself and demanding equal treatment, I had forced everyone to examine their assumptions and change their behavior. The healing process after our family reconciliation was gradual but genuine. It took several months for the new dynamics to feel natural rather than forced, and there were moments when old patterns threatened to resurface. But the foundation of mutual respect and acknowledgement we had established proved strong enough to support continued growth and improvement. One of the most unexpected benefits of this entire experience was the transformation in my relationship with Sienna. Having to work full-time and contribute financially to the household had given her a maturity and perspective she had never possessed before. She began seeking my advice about career decisions, financial planning, and even relationship issues. "I never realized how much you were handling all by yourself," she told me during one of our new regular sister conversations. "I always thought you had everything figured out so easily, but now I understand how much work and sacrifice was involved." Our parents also continued demonstrating their commitment to treating us equally. They made conscious efforts to celebrate my achievements, ask about my life, and include me in family decisions. The change wasn't just symbolic, it was practical and consistent. When I received another promotion at work, they threw a small celebration dinner and bragged about my success to relatives with the same enthusiasm they had always shown for Sienna's accomplishments. When I mentioned wanting to take a vacation with James, they encouraged me to prioritize my own happiness rather than feeling obligated to send extra money to them. My relationship with James also benefited enormously from the resolution of my family issues. The stress and secrecy that had been straining our connection disappeared, replaced by open communication and shared goals. He had supported me through the most difficult period of standing up to my family, and witnessing my growth in self-worth and boundary setting had strengthened his respect and affection for me. 6 months after resuming financial support to my family, Dad's health had improved enough for him to return to full-time construction work. Combined with Sienna's steady employment and Mom's tutoring income, they were able to achieve financial stability without relying on my assistance. When I announced that I would be gradually reducing my monthly contributions as their situation improved, their response was everything I had hoped for during those years of invisible sacrifice. They expressed sincere gratitude for everything I had done, acknowledged the personal cost of my generosity, and supported my decision to prioritize my own financial goals. "You've given us so much more than money," Mom said during the conversation about transitioning away from my support. "You've taught us about appreciation, respect, and recognizing the people who love us enough to sacrifice for our well-being." The most profound change was in my own sense of self-worth and family identity. For the first time in my life, I felt like an equally valued daughter rather than a supporting character in Sienna's story. My contributions were recognized, my opinions were respected, and my presence was genuinely appreciated. This transformation allowed me to rebuild my financial stability and pursue goals I had put on hold during the years of extreme sacrifice. I was able to move to a nicer apartment, Start saving for the future and even begin planning for the possibility of marriage and starting my own family with James. The lesson I learned through this painful but necessary process was that love should never require you to sacrifice your dignity or self-worth. For years, I had believed that providing financial support without recognition was a noble form of love, but I discovered that healthy relationships require mutual respect and acknowledgement. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish when you're asking for basic human dignity. Demanding equal treatment isn't unreasonable when you've been consistently overlooked and undervalued. Sometimes, the people who love you need to lose your support temporarily to remember why they should value and appreciate you. The most important realization was that your worth as a person isn't determined by what you're willing to give up for others, but by how you honor and respect yourself in the process of loving them. True family love creates space for everyone to be seen, valued, and appreciated for their unique contributions. Today, my relationship with my family is healthier and stronger than it has ever been. We've learned to communicate directly about needs and expectations rather than making assumptions. We celebrate each other's successes genuinely and support each other's struggles without creating unfair burdens or invisible sacrifices. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family or unappreciated despite your sacrifices, I want you to know that it's possible to change those dynamics. It requires courage, boundaries, and sometimes difficult conversations, but the result is relationships built on mutual respect rather than taken for granted contributions. Let me know in the comments if you've experienced similar family dynamics and how you handled them. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself in ways that felt uncomfortable but necessary? Please share your thoughts and experiences below. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button to let me know, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about family, relationships, and finding your voice in difficult situations. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by their willingness to be invisible. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it encourages you to value yourself as much as you value the people you love. Remember, you deserve to be seen, appreciated, and treated with the same respect you give to others.